I'm really interested in the idea of imagination activists, that there's a form of activism which is just the very powerful force of imagining that things could be different and that we could choose who we want to be and like what kind of lives we want to lead. And I think, you know, for the direction that we as a human species need to go in this next decade, and you know, actually this next decade is crucial, cultivating the kind of courage to do what you believe is right. We each find in ourselves what is our moral compass or our sense of what is right and wrong, and I think that is really important. I don't think we should shy away from that. The kind of decisions we're going to have to make in this next 10 years, often they're going to seem totally bonkers, like the kind of decisions that will actually change things.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with me, Dan Burgess. The concept of the Spaceship Earth is simple. We live on a life-giving rock called Earth, hurtling through space. Like a spaceship, we have a finite amount of supplies with an intelligent operating system, which keeps everything we need replenished as long as we all respect it and use wisely. So an understanding of how this system works, along with deep cooperation between humans and all life, is essential to keep us thriving and the spaceship flying. In this podcast, I'm in conversation with humans involved in regenerating life, shifting consciousness, and reimagining how we can live more beautifully and peacefully. I talk with artists, activists, writers, designers, adventurers, healers, entrepreneurs, creative mavericks, and more. Their stories invite us to participate in the co-creation of a more beautiful, life-sustaining world, in service to life, becoming crew on Spaceship Earth. Welcome to the podcast. This is Dan. Thanks for tuning in. It means a lot. I'm emerging from hibernation, sort of, in a period of composting the remains of 2021. I've been trying to start this year in a more restful way. A revolutionary act, it seems, in this culture of modernity. And I've been out on the landscapes as much as I can, getting close to Gaia. And some of that time I've been reflecting a little bit on the next phase of this podcast. So the intention this year is to mix things up a bit more. Keep some long-form conversations going with inspiring crew, but also produce some more immersive episodes. Some shorter creative offerings and meditations from guests. And obviously the cheeky music mixes for dancing our way into a more beautiful world. They will remain, all offered up in service to life. Fertilizer for these uncertain times. The great unravelling, or the great turning, as Joanna Macy would say, to help us reconnect with ourselves, each other, and our more than human family, and the vast intelligence of life that we're all a part of. As ever, I'm trying to figure out how to sustain the podcast. One thing I would ask, if you appreciate this podcast, is to share episodes with others. Consider giving us a rating and a review of the podcast, and maybe subscribe to our occasional newsletter where we'll be communicating news, invitations to support the podcast through micro donations, community gatherings, and radical learning experiences to help reconnect and regenerate life on our spaceship Earth. So let's get to this episode 57 with Phoebe Tickell. Now, Phoebe is a renegade scientist, a systems thinker, and as she puts it, member of the future generation. She's a solar punk from the year 2072. A planet where we speak to animals, plants, bacteria and ancestors. And she's bringing life back to Earth with her moral imagination, mission and platform, which we'll dig into. Now, I met Phoebe properly last year, although we've been sort of gently tangling over many years through our individual inquiring and collective networks. But Phoebe is an extraordinary human, and the work she is doing, I believe, is some of the most vital work of these unravelling times. She's part of a wider emerging field of humans who are intentionally focusing on ways to support people to build the capacity in all of us to use our imaginations to design and bring forth a new world where all life, present and future, is considered, where we create new human systems where care and responsibility for all life, now and in the future, is baked in. Phoebe has found her gift quite young. She's not yet 30 years old, and she's putting everything in service to life, which is what I find so exciting and inspiring, because when we understand we are part of a vast, intelligent, evolving web of life, and our gifts are the key to letting go of the old destructive stories, we begin to navigate our path towards bringing life back through our own uniqueness, invariably orienting towards serving life itself. And so this conversation happened in a wood around a fire on a dark, cold and beautiful January evening in Devon. I was on a road trip in my van. I'd been surfing that morning, and I met Phoebe later that afternoon. This, therefore, was a very emergent conversation. We didn't really plan anything. I couldn't read the few notes I'd made anyway, as it was dark. It's a reflective conversation, I think, because we were both stirring, if you like, from slowing down at the end of 2021, a sort of period of wintering and composting, which we speak to. So we're exploring some big questions and reflections that were alive for us in that wood at that time. But I think these are questions which feel vital for these times. I really enjoyed this conversation. I encourage you to explore Phoebe's work. I'll link to all of her links in the show notes. Follow her on Twitter for sort of beautiful imagination flavoured fertiliser. And as I was about to record this today, I saw a quote from mythologist Michael Meade, and it reads, "Imagination is the deepest power of the human soul." Imagination is the deepest power of the human soul. So let's cut to it. This is episode 57 of the Spaceship Earth podcast with Phoebe Tickell.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with my dad, Dan Burgess.
So, Phoebe, welcome to the Spaceship Earth podcast.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
And this is like, I think this is possibly the most exciting context, environment, place even that I've recorded an episode in so far. I mean, we'd have to describe this a bit, because obviously people are, it's audio, it's imagination. It's all about the imagination.
Close your eyes and imagine a beautiful, burning, crackling fire and blue flames, smoke and burning embers.
There's some, I think they're crows or rooks that are roosting. It's dusk.
It's dusk, and we just heard a tawny owl.
We did.
Did you say? Yeah.
I'm hoping we might hear a few more of those.
Yeah.
But we're in the marvellous woods behind Schumacher College.
Indeed, and beautiful. I think the last thing worth mentioning is the beautiful tall redwoods.
Yeah,
redwood trees
in deep Devonian landscapes.
It does have that feeling, doesn't it?
Yeah, but those folks not of these lands. We're down in the southwest parts of England, in Devon, and it's all come together like beautifully, because I'm really excited because I've come down to Devon and we're doing this conversation, and I love the fact we didn't really sort of plan this, did we? We said, like, I said, look, I'm coming down for you. Do you want to meet up? We'll do this podcast. I've been trying to catch up we've been trying to do this. Well, we've had this intention, haven't we, for a while? And now we're sitting literally round this extraordinary fire in this incredible wood, watching the dusk sort of fall, and I mean, you couldn't really have asked for a better spot, could we?
No, and it was amazing because before you came down, I had this thought of, like, I'd love to. I know you do loads of nature connection and being in the wild, and I was just thinking, like, you know, we could record a conversation like inside, or maybe we could do something just spontaneous, like go to the ocean or go and light a fire. And then we came out, you know, we went and got some wood and we came to the forest. And what did we find, Dan?
Thinking we were going to have to start a fire, and we found a fire. Yeah. And, like, not just any old fire, but like sort of like one of those kind of like just extraordinary campfires, already lit and burning. And this isn't a lie, by the way. This is actually happening. This isn't an imaginal kind of desire. It's
imaginal fire.
Exactly. It's right here, and I've taken some photos, so you'll be able to see these in the episode notes, the photos of where we are. But it's just I just love that. It's really lovely when things just happen with a little bit of an intention, but not much. It doesn't happen that much, I have to say, in my life these days, where I can sort of walk into the woods and there's a fire.
Total emergence.
Yeah. And it's where are we? We're in the third week of January. Mm-hmm. Third week of January 2022. How are you feeling? How are you feeling right now?
How am I feeling right now? Well, I love being out in nature, and that's part of why I'm based down here at the moment. I think in a larger sense, how I'm feeling, that's a bigger question. Obviously, what we've all collectively been through, and this last like 2 years, has it been? Just the distortion of time, and so much has happened. It's felt like 10 years condensed into 2. I've just come out of quite a reflective period, which I guess is actually continuing, which is nice. It's funny when you take time out to reflect and, you know, connect to yourself, and you just think, actually, isn't this how I should always be? Not like this is me taking a break. But yeah, it's left me feeling very grounded and centered, which is really, really nice. And also just really that feeling of there's so much to do, and yet, you know, we can all only do the things that really bring us alive. And that's what we were talking about just earlier, is, you know, finding those things that really bring you joy. And you can't do everything. You know, you can be an activist and someone who really wants to have a positive impact and try and be of service, but yeah, it's like the fire, isn't it? You can't burn. If it burns too brightly, it'll end.
Exactly. We'll be cold.
It'll be cold
in an hour
and dark. So you've got to pace it and add bits of wood. Exactly.
This pausing, though, isn't it? This slowing down, and, you know, I've been sort of really intentionally trying to just move a little bit more, as much as I can, with what I can see and feel that the more than human world is doing right now. I'm trying to be guided, if you like, informed. Since the same thing, having taken a bit of a break at the end of the year, and just recognizing, like, you know, like not, like, you know, I sort of came off the internet for nearly 3 weeks, you know, just how after a few days, once I sort of, the twitching had sort of stopped, just how I started to read again, like piles of books I've just been struggling to to focus on and actually just being able to be to have the sort of ability to have attention really, which again is this thing of like, at least for me, is always like running really fast, it's urgent times, action, but there's something very interesting and challenging as well about sort of trusting the pace that it feels like, as I say, if I think about what I'm experiencing in these, in this January, from what I can sense around where I live and what I'm seeing around me, I know there's stuff going on beneath the soil and in the trees and all this great sort of stuff that's going on, but there's a kind of slowness, and I've been trying to trust that this month and actually really massively benefiting from it. Do you know what I mean? And there's the panic, at least for me, there's panic of like, oh God, work and find this and got to secure this, and but actually I've been resisting intentionally, and it hasn't been as difficult as I usually find it. And what I'm noticing is that from that space and from that sort of quietness, some really interesting things are happening, like fires being made in the woods,
Yeah. Well, and if as we'll probably come on to in this conversation, like if you really believe that the earth is a magical place and even maybe a being itself, like Gaia, then how can we notice the magic? How can we perceive that magic that's right there and access the imaginal and the these things that make life really special, and really mystical. Part of, I think, slowing down is then having the bit, like even just opening the space in yourself, in your mind and heart and being, to actually notice that stuff that's happening around you.
And since you say it's funny, isn't it? How actually, it's always been there. It's all there, this living earth. But actually, it's like for whatever reasons in this kind of modern world, it's become increasingly more challenging to notice what is not human, or what is more than just human. Or at least that's my perception when I sort of look around and listen and sense how other people are finding the world and everything that's going on in it. But actually, it's interesting, isn't it? Because in many ways, once you've sort of like understand, maybe learning how to notice and sort of practicing how to notice, because I think it is a practice, then it's like, it's all, yeah. It's all live.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's like the world becomes like poetry or art, it becomes like something that you participate in and is lyrical and poetic and beautiful. There's so much that I'd love to dive into on that, because that's, in the essence, that's what a lot of the work that I've been doing, and I know you've also been doing, is around this shifting of perception. But not, what's interesting is it's not, shifting perception to get away from the world. It's the shifting of perception to become in closer relationship with what is actually here. And that's like my background in science has been a really big part of that, because I believe that science in many ways has led us to be like more alienated and disconnected from nature and reality and the magic of being human. But actually there's science that can take us back into relationship, and like learning about the wood wide web and mycelium and even the microbiome. Like, it's just insane when you learn about how bacteria are controlling our moods and like our appetites and stuff. And when I was a scientist, I was especially actually once I left science, I was learning all of this. I was calling it at the time like postmodern biology, which is funny because it's probably now, like, people might say it's like metamodern biology, whatever that means. But that, that there are these new discoveries in biology and things like epigenetics and the microbiome that are just almost leading us back like a kind of secret breadcrumb trail back to this close interdependence with nature and with, as you say, the more than human. And I'm fascinated by that.
It's when you talk about science, because I think, again, like in our sort of, and again, I guess what I'm thinking, in our sort of maybe Western, globalised, the global north, very modern kind of techno sort of heavy cultures. When I think of science, and I see it as when I talk about science with my kids or whatever, it's there's a sort of sense of, and I guess with COVID, we've been experiencing a lot of this, chatter around science, But it's interesting, isn't it? Because of the sort of certainty of science, do you know what I mean? And what we look for answers. But yet, as I've through my own explorations, trying to understand, this sort of Western view of science and how it's evolved over what is just a few hundred years, really. And what that science doesn't refer to, what it doesn't speak to. And I've been listening to a lot about, sort of indigenous science, which will be, has been sort of seen as, it's not science, because it's not science how we see it in the West. But so all that is kind of missed out and not included. Yeah. And I think that's why it's such an interesting time now, because it feels like, at least, and again, I'm no scientist, but my understanding is that the leading edges of science are effectively converging with what ancient wisdom and indigenous cultures have always known. Everything is alive, everything is in relationship, everything is connected.
It's like, oh wow, we've got this amazing discovery. Guys, stop the bus. Actually, we were wrong. It's a little bit, it reminds me of back in like 2013 or 2014, when I just after I'd graduated, I became quite involved in mindfulness, like teaching teenagers mindfulness. So it was part of a bigger curriculum, a project, a company I was involved in starting called 225 Academy. I'm like hesitant to mention it because it's a whole story of itself. So I'm like, that's a whole chapter.
If you want to go there, it's up to you.
I mean, it was a massively influenced what I do today, because it was after I went to Cambridge for my undergraduate and really struggled with the learning environment and with multiple things. Like, one of the things that I really struggled with was the way science was taught and the fact that it was so reductionist. And I took a module in ecology, and we didn't spend any time in nature. And we just, it was like ecology is all about the study of relationships in nature. And yet we were, the expectation was to learn lots of categories, and it was all about dividing up and kind of learning names of things. And to me, it felt like I wasn't getting closer to life. I was getting further away, because it was becoming like an abstract, analytical thing. But the other part that didn't fit the way I wanted that experience to be was like the learning environment. It was, it was like one person at the front of a 100-person lecture hall, crammed. Each week we were kind of crammed with information. There was 12 lectures a week, 3 5 or 6 hour labs. It was such a onslaught of information. It's reminds me of what Edward Wilson, who recently passed away, was quite a big inspiration for me as a biologist. He talks about how we're overloaded with information, but we're totally starved of wisdom. And that was that experience of there's no time and space to really learn and sense into this amazing stuff we were learning, and to really integrate it, and a lot of other things. It was just very, very disconnected from, what do you want to do after your degree? There was nothing about, what do you want to do with your life? Who are you? Asking these bigger questions, which I think I've always been asking. And in a way, that's resonated through this last 10 years, is like asking these big questions, because it feels like that's what's important. That's what shapes like a human life, is asking that question: who do I want to be? What is my life about? And like, what am I here for? What do I want to be in service of? This is a big ramble. So we're talking about 225.
Rambles are good.
Yeah, rambles are good. 225 Academy. So that was after I graduated, and a friend of mine from college was starting this company to run transformative learning labs for teenagers age 11 to 18. And he got in touch because I'd been posting about, how we need to transform education. And I was reading Krishnamurti at the time, so amazing philosopher, and Paulo Freire, and these amazing thinkers on education. And and so we had this crazy company that ran these 5-day learning labs for teenagers, and we went out to Singapore and Hong Kong and Dubai and Mumbai, and tried to deliver these curriculums that, the way we thought about it was like, what would we have loved to learn at school? And so mindfulness was like a big part of the curriculum, and teaching kids about like the neuroscience of mindfulness and why it's so important. And to loop back around, I just remember like at that time, all these studies were coming out about how like neuroscience is showing that mindfulness and, this practice that Buddhists have been practicing for like 2,000 years with no science, they just knew intuitively, and they developed these ancient practices and wisdom. And then, 2,000 years later, you've got science being like, we found that it, rewires the brain, and it's like amazing for like stress reduction. And I just wonder like how many more things are we going to discover like that we've rejected, and then it comes back around as soon as science backs it up. A really key thing is that we don't have to go back to how things were. It's impossible to do that. So it's working out, how do we, the only way is through. We can only go through this current time and integrate what we've learned from, everything that's happened, as you said, this last hundreds of years of since the scientific enlightenment and colonialism and all of the harm that has been done, that we're all complicit in, although some of us, more complicit than others. And just that reminds me of, you mentioned indigenous science. I just thought I'd mention Greg Kahete, who's an amazing indigenous scientist whose work really influenced me actually while I was here at Schumacher. So just in case anybody's interested in that thread. And also Pat McCabe, amazing work. I met Pat here at Schumacher actually in my first 2 weeks when I'd arrived in Totnes, and I took part in a retreat that she hosted with Charles Eisenstein, and we've stayed in touch since, and she's been a huge inspiration, and recently came on a course that I've just run called Tools for the Regenerative Renaissance. That was, if you're listening, Pat, it was amazing. And also encourage people to look at her work.
Yeah, and my I've come across some of Pat's work and listened to her and just in awe. But again, of this, there's a sort of I guess maybe this is even in just how she will deliver and speak to what she knows. It's still, there's never a sort of sense of, and therefore, this is the answer. There's still this sort of real sort of
humility.
Yeah, just and I think this I guess it's this tonality of these times that's very interesting. How we step face into these things in a with this humility, with this ability to hold that complexity and obviously offer up our learnings, our wisdom, our things, but how to hold lightly and do you know what I mean? And I think that's increasing. That's something I'm really interested in, and I think you're, I'm imagining through the work that you're doing, particularly how we can maybe we can speak a bit to to the moral imagination work, but the work that you've been doing, holding these kind of processes with people, what you're learning from that. Because I don't know, it just seems to me that this, how we do things, is really now, that's the real key thing. It's how are we actually convening, how are we speaking to each other, do you know what I mean? How are we bringing our knowledge into spaces, and how are we holding those in ways that we're not part of that old story, which is this binary, us versus them, hierarchical, violent, rude. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think for me, my journey has been realizing that we talk a lot about changing the system and systems change and all of that, making change, but all of us are also the system. So it's really it's a really uncomfortable paradox that it's almost like a kind of loop, where you're like, we're trying to change the system, but we're also the system. So how is that working? And actually, for real systems change, we need to confront what that will mean for all of our lives. You can't really have systems change and stay in the same position of power and comfort and just really facing that, I think, is really important for anyone who is in that work. I don't know, I'm just riffing here, but for me at least, it took quite a big realization to realize that you can't change the system out there. It's also all of our lives are going to change massively, drastically, and it's going to be impossible to keep hold of the kind of old world power if we're moving into this new way of doing things, which I think is quite uncomfortable for many of us, and maybe all of us.
Yeah, and it's also like, I mean, I don't know about you, but I mean, as I say, I feel, it's been turbulent couple of years, but ultimately, I've been quite lucky. But I still feel, even though I've rested and whatever over the last few weeks, I still feel very discombobulated by everything. Do you know what I mean? And you kind of think, what would, if you were going to, if you were imagining now a sort of a society, a culture that had just gone through what we've all been going through, and obviously many have been going through, horrific levels of pain and struggle, but you would kind of go, well, if you're coming out, and who knows if we are, if we're coming out of this thing, what would a sane culture do? It's a question I ask myself a lot. It's like, I think a sane culture would spend quite a bit of time talking about what's happened, and holding spaces for people to talk about what they've experienced and how they've felt and what they've learned and what has been painful, and what I mean? But that feels like the last thing that this world, the system we're all a part of, wants to do. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's sort of does. And so it's kind of like, and of course I know, on the ground across this wonderful earth, there are people doing exactly that, and there are communities doing that, and there is that going on. But it feels like a sane culture would be talking to that. It would be speaking to that. It would be kind of like it would be encouraging that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because to move into what is coming, and to be able to move into sort of this, this reimagination almost of everything. That's not an easy thing to do if you're carrying shed loads of trauma, fear, anger, and you're struggling to think about how you're gonna, feed your children or pay your rent. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think you're so right. This moment asks of us enormous amounts of empathy and compassion, and I think when you ask that question, what would a sane culture do? the first thing that came to mind was like grief circles, just like circles of people actually sharing what they've been through and what has been hard, and supporting each other. And it's like some of these tools are so basic, like we were talking about earlier, like just coming together in circle and just being able to be together.
Circle technology, as I like to call it.
Yeah, really high tech. Totally. Ancient and new ways. But people are yearning for that. And I get really excited about is creating containers, or like the conditions where people can come alive to their own like agency, their own sense of like, oh, I can go out and organize this thing that I need and I know others need. And I talk quite a lot about permission. It's like, I feel like a lot of us have kind of learned helplessness from being in hierarchical systems and organizations, and just learning that any idea I have will be shut down, or there's no point in trying, and there's no point in dreaming, and don't be silly, don't be this whole thing also of the imagination, like, oh, don't be like fanciful. Like, the thing that's holding us back, like one of the things that's holding us back is this sense of we're just going to be shut down anyway. And I think hopefully over these next years, like the kind of movements that will be born and that will keep on strengthening in the face of everything we're facing, in the face of everything that's coming, they'll be about people, normal people coming together, like that quote by Margaret Mead, like the small groups of people that come together. I can't remember what the quote is. Like never... The small groups of citizens. Oh dear. Well,
if anyone knows what Phoebe's talking about, send us a message.
Never doubt that a small group of committed.
That's all that's ever. That's something like that, isn't it? It's like it's the only thing that ever changed things, or something like that. Yeah.
We'll get there in the
exactly.
end.
Never doubt that a small group of people can change the world indeed. It is the only thing that ever has. Never doubt that
it's all about crews, isn't it?
It's all about crews. It's all about relationship.
Yeah.
Well,
back to the more than human, isn't it? It's all about relationships, not things. It's relationships. I mean, it's I've been getting into composting. I mean, I've been composting sort of material things out of my kitchen for years, and putting them on I built this compost heap, but I'm fascinated with it, and then like the whole composting process I find absolutely fascinating and very rewarding when compost pops out the compost pile a few months later, and then I put it on the veg patch, and stuff grows, and I eat that stuff, eat those veg, and it's just the most exciting thing because of all those relationships. And then obviously exploring, the concept of composting more deeply and widely beyond just the, beyond just the sort of waste that comes out of the kitchen. But the waste, or it's not always the waste, but, like what happens through me, all the, and what happens through all of us. But for me, it's like what's happening through me, that it might be the projects that I've been working on, or the things I've got really tangled up in that I think are important, and maybe realizing that they're not, or even sometimes like beliefs and and stories maybe that I've been kind of living by or whatever. And then this idea of seeing these things more as seeing them as cycles, as life, does, outside of our human realm, but actually sort of starting to see some of these things and looking at them more as letting go of stuff, letting go of things and spending time kind of composting them, sort of, metaphorically, but this idea that actually there's something quite interesting for me, and I feel we're in this time. I feel we're, for me, I make sense of these times as I feel like we're in this kind of very sort of lost time, if that makes sense. A sort of lost sort of stories that we're sort of living by.
Space between stories.
Yeah, and I feels like the sort of modern human, species is lost. We're lost, particularly in the sort of these highly, inverted commas, developed sort of societies, and so I sort of have been looking a lot at thinking about, the need for things to die, and not, but more in, belief stories, obviously things like systems and behaviours and stuff. But behaviours and stories are quite interesting because, ultimately that's where I've been going quite a lot of recent is, and I know this connects with, this is what we've connected around a lot last year, but, these stories that we live by are the things that shape how we see the world and how we end up, designing our lives. But actually there's this sense of like, what does it feel like? And these times to me feel like times to sort of compost, to sort of for things to die. Quite a lot of these things that have been they're just no longer serving life, So I'm really interested in that, and then obviously have been sort of exploring that myself, and just in my own sort of how to let go of my own, the things that are no longer serving me. I've been doing quite a lot of that over the Christmas break, and actually getting into the compost heap, getting into the leaves, and just sitting down, just lying on like the forest floor and stuff, and getting smelling what's going on,
getting a banana peel off your face, getting in amongst it.
I was in the woods on Sunday and just noticing how the smell was shifting from where it had been like in November, December. The leaves were really starting to. The composting process was really sort of underway. You know what I mean? But I'm really interested in those ideas. That's sort of like how that can be quite a powerful and useful way of thinking about how to let go some of this stuff, because I feel that sort of, when you look at the complexity, you look at all these problems, and I speak to friends and peers who are, in their own ways are really starting to struggle with where do they go next with their lives, because so much of what they thought, and if they've got kids or whatever, so much of it has been based on this identity, these stories, and they could, without them saying, you can start to sense that they're seeing that these stories are coming apart.
Mm-hmm.
They're not what they thought they were.
I see that as well.
Do you know what I mean?
And I see it in organisations as well.
Yeah.
Like, what's beautiful and also, very frightening, I'd say, for a lot of organisations that I work with, and also, leaders and people, is like they see that it's not working, but the alternative is so scary because it's so unknown. It's so like, if we have to change everything, what's going to become of us? And it's just such a huge amount of uncertainty and unknownness, that I think, the role of everyone who has done that, gone on that journey, or found those alternatives, and everybody listening, if you're someone who ever did go on that journey of leaving a job, or leaving a kind of previous way of living behind and diving into something very different, it is very uncomfortable in the first couple of years or months, or however long it takes you. It takes different amounts of time, but that journey is basically the journey that everybody is going to have to go on if we are going to shift society from basically being a self-exterminating one to one that can be life-sustaining, like Joanna Macy says, life-sustaining society that can thrive.
And I wonder, as I'm listening, I'm wondering whether this idea of, you know, this story of certainty. So you say, like, this, people have got this fear of, oh my, but what, you know, what possibly, how, you know. But, you know, I'm increasingly thinking that this story of certainty has been like a sort of 50, 60-year illusion, because I just think, like, the last few decades in particular is just created, I see, this total illusion of certainty and this kind of linear sort of idea of progress and certainty, and you know,
like a Ponzi scheme where the Earth is at the bottom.
Right, exactly. And because people have been kind of educated and culturally groomed to think that we just sort of exist above nature, we just sort of build on top of it, and not aware of the relationships and these impacts. It's like what you just sort of think that you're just going to keep sort of going upwards. You know what I mean? But, you know, again, I think of our evolution in an evolutionary time. Did we ever, you know, I can't believe people ever, for most evolutionary time, would never have certainty of the future. Do you know what I mean? Would have been, most of the time, I imagine, would have always been uncertain. But you would have practices and community and ways of living that helped you lean into that with maybe joy, or, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And presence. Whereas this feels like a really recent thing, this idea of certainty, and I think it's probably a very Western, global North privileged thing.
Very.
Because I'm guessing the majority of people on this earth, you know, have no certainty, never have.
Exactly. It's like is it William Gibson who said, like, the apocalypse is here, it's just not evenly distributed yet? Or maybe I think that's a riff on the original quote, but that's the quote that stuck with me. Is like, you know, the apocalypse is already here, climate change is already here. When people are saying, oh God, you know, climate catastrophe and breakdown is coming, it's like, yeah, but it's actually already here. It's just not here
it's
in
not
the West.
Exactly.
It's not in London, but it is present already. Definitely. I like what you were saying about the kind of living in uncertainty. And I think I'm just remembering a conversation with Nora Bateson, who talks about kind of addiction as a really good metaphor for this time. It's like, you know, it's like an addiction to a certain way of living, and often, you know, in an addictive pattern, it gets worse and worse and worse, and it's like this it's an exponential curve. You know, addiction to drugs or whatever it is, smoking or alcohol or you know, shopping, Netflix, everything. It can be. It's this, you know, in terms of kind of cybernetics, it's like this. It's an ever increasing loop, and in Gregory Bateson's terms, like a schismogenesis, which is like when systems go into overdrive and towards collapse, basically. So it's quite interesting that addiction has got that pattern to it, as has the pattern that we're in as a society that's just accelerating on this illusion that we can keep doing that, you know, the illusion of growth of, we can just keep on, you know, we can just keep on extracting and building, and we're just not looking at the uncomfortable, you know, trail of destruction. It's kind of similar to like when somebody's in an addict pattern of like not seeing the destruction because they're just in a pattern that they can't stop.
And I think, like, if we can sort of go into I'd like to sort of just talk into this imagination realm, because something for me about this and what you're speaking to and these patterns. So one of the things, again, it's an observation and thing, but it feels like it's very difficult to cultivate an imagination when you don't create space, you know, space, pausing, rest, and also when you I would say, let's call it the machine, right? When you're sort of in this machine, which is highly sort of techno, fast, sort of appears very slick and very sort of interesting, but it's so removed from the life we're speaking to, like, you know, the living earth and all of these relationships that, and again, what we understand by when you know, what we started this conversation, when you your perception of the earth as a living thing, when that's been tweaked, when you've seen it, felt it, your capacity for imagination just goes off the scale. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So there's something interesting or really challenging at the moment, I think, as well, about this fact that, and that's why I'd love to get into the imagination work, because if these times are calling for radical imagination, and the fertilizer, if you like, for that, part of that would be space, rest, the ability to pause, the ability to kind of like, to feel well, not to be panicking, for example, or highly stressed, and also to feel connected to that which is not human, to understand that we are, that we're part of this living organism, and therefore to get us to imagine something that's going to bring that life back, we need to understand it and connect with it. And yet the majority of people are struggling on both those dimensions to be in that space. Totally.
Yeah, absolutely. On the imagination work, the way I think about it, the image that comes to mind is like a white-knuckled grip on, things being the way they are and not wanting to change, and fear and, panic and stress. And, that completely blocks the ability to imagine, and to imagine in that boundless, creative, dreamlike way that is as you say, the fertilizer for new worlds, for different worlds, which is exactly what we need. I often talk about rewilding the imagination, like the need to rewild it, and to, to spread fertilizer, to allow composting, and you're talking about rest and taking space and taking a pause, like that is how you make, I think, the compost to imagination. And then, when we think about, like in a lot of the workshops and spaces I host, often we invite people to talk about their childhoods and like the spaces in their childhoods where people were able to, the places where they left like linear time, where there was just time to explore, where, there were no clocks, no screens. I mean, it's a very old and tired thing, like, oh yeah, kids are too glued to screens, but it's so much more dangerous than, it's not just the screen, it's also the being glued to the time dial on the iPad that is, counting the minutes. And I think, it just hasn't been long enough in terms of how long we've had like iPads and like, bringing up babies, looking at iPads from when they're born. Those babies haven't grown up yet to be adults. Like we don't know what that impact is going to be on nervous systems and the imagination. And it's really frightening, actually. And that's part of the kind of political side of the imagination work, which, it really it's like a fire that makes me want to do it. Is like the risk, the cost of not tending the imagination is like this flattened, I talk about this great flattening, like this flattening of our senses, and we won't know that that's happened. So it's like this, it's very dystopian, actually, because it's like we won't be able to tell that anything's changed, because we won't, people who, when we're growing up in these very digital, flattened environments, we won't know what it was like to grow up in a different way.
We live on a life-giving rock called Earth, hurtling through space. How bonkers is that? You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast. Yeah, and it's all happening it's all happening so fast. Again, in sort of in an evolutionary time, Earth time, we're talking like seconds or minutes. It's just that these shifts are happening. Can you speak to, for listeners, like, just give us a sense of moral imagination, because I know that's the sort of core of your focus, and for folks just to understand like what does that encompass? What's it all about?
Yeah, definitely. So moral imagination is about hosting a space for people to ask those deeper questions, like who do I want to be? What do I choose to do? What kind of worlds are possible? And obviously imagination we hear about a lot, and there's a lot of imagination has existed for as long as humans have existed. It's not a new thing, and I think there's been a lot of brilliant work around creativity and imagination, especially like Sir Ken Robinson, who I know that you interviewed kind of 6 years ago, which is amazing. Just love his work and his contribution to the field, just extraordinary. I think what moral imagination is about is like how, what do we choose to do, like this topic of choice of actually using the imagination to cultivate a moral courage to act in this time, and to cultivate a sense of how things could be different. It's also for me connected to the faith that there are different options than the ones on the table. So that ability to think, no, like I know that things could be better. Like this is all that's available right now. Like, for example, the education system, like, okay, you can choose to go to this school or you can choose to go to that school. But what if there's a different way, a way that is better? And that takes moral imagination, because it's like that sense that things could be different, and in being different, they could be better. They could be better for everyone. Like, I think one of the first ever blog post that I wrote on my blog in 2015 was a quote by Buckminster Fuller, that the mission, I can't remember the exact wording, but the aim and the mission of this time is to make the world work for 100% of humanity and all beings, and that's what we need to do, without any harm to the planet and without any cost to anybody.
Through continuous spontaneous cooperation.
Exactly. Exactly. So if that's the task, it's going to take, and everything we've talked about in the last hour, like we're locked into systems that don't work, and so to get out of them, we're going to have to think differently. Like we're going to have to think in ways that are not the current ways, because those are the ones that we're locked into. So how can we use moral imagination to imagine something better? And so the practices and the approach of the Moral Imaginations Project is to use these shifts in perception, using the shift to the more than human world's perception, so looking through the eyes of a more than human being, and we can talk more about the practices, or looking through the eyes of the future generations and connecting with our ancestors and where we come from. And when we expand that perception, when we expand, Brian Eno talks about the long time, or like the long now. I think he actually talks about the long now and the big here, which I love, and that's really central to this work. Is like the long now is expanding our sense of time and really placing ourselves in this cosmic deep time. Like humans have come so late, like we're like the little brother of all the other species. As in indigenous traditions, it's often, people often talk about the human species is like the little brother, the one that's learning, that's here to learn, and the big here is like expanding that sense of where we are and what other species are here with us. So that, the project was born just around 2 years ago now, and it's really been born out of my work with Joanna Macy. So she's been an incredibly important teacher to me, and I was trained in her methodologies called The Work That Reconnects in 2016. And then after that, she continued to be a mentor and somebody who's just helped me on this journey of working out, like, what are my gifts to give to the world, and what would I like to contribute, and what do I do with this background in science, but at the same time, this desire to help the world transition to a different way of being. And through her, she's who actually introduced me to the term moral imagination, and she speaks very beautifully on it. So, you can look up a video of Joanna talking about the power of the moral imagination. So that's a little I love introduction.
There's so much. Just listening to you, so much. I was just thinking about the the little human, the little baby human, and it just makes me laugh because I just sort of like, but my head just sort of takes me to sort of current sort of like UK politics, for example, and you just see these characters that are just like the hubris of just being these sort of powerful people. And it's the thing, it's like like plants, they're the elders, right? I mean, it's like we're surrounded by all these trees, all these plants. They've been here way longer than we have. And just these, it's so interesting, isn't it? Because again, if you can imagine that kind of shift in perception, you can imagine. We designed our human systems with that kind of humility, that kind of sense of this family of life around us that we could learn so much from because they've been here for so much longer than us. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, how do we treat our sort of elder humans? Do you know what I mean? And so that's just like such an interesting thought. And then I'm just it's listening to you talk about Joanna Macy's ascension, for me being here in Schumacher. The first time I came across her work was here.
I thought that it's really meaningful that we're here. I
think it was 2010 when I did a week here, and we did during the week of Gaia Theory, we had a Work That Reconnects workshop one evening, which was mind expanding and emotionally. What's the word?
Emotionally stretching.
Yeah, stretching, and phenomenal, really. And I think that's the thing when I think of her work that I've been exposed to and read and witnessed and whatever. Just like you say, there's so much wisdom, but there's also a real simplicity in it, which is why it sort of feels again these times. A calling for this, for these types of ways of sort of trying to know the world differently.
Something I was just thinking about as you were talking is that I always see it as like it's always a choice. Like it's not that there's a better. I guess it's a paradox because in a sense it's not that there's a better way and everybody should do this way. But it's just like, well, here's a choice. Like, would you like to? How does it feel for you to be connected with who you are, why you're here, a sense of the generations of beings, both human and non-human, that have basically given you the opportunity to be alive on Earth, and the wonder in that, and the awe, and the humility, and life becomes like a magical thing, and it's a choice. It's not like you should connect to the more than human world, or you should build an empathy.
It's like, you really need to check this shit out.
Yeah, exactly. It's like our friend Paddy talks about. If you want to change the system, you have to throw a better party. Yeah, isn't he? That's a great quote.
Usually in the woods.
But I think it is really important not to get righteous or uppity about like, oh, this is the better way, this is the more enlightened way, and I always say, like, you can't make magic happen, you can just create the conditions for magic, and people, and you can't force imagination, you can only invite and create the conditions for imagination, and so I think that's really important because it's a choice. That's all right. No,
a log on the fire.
This
is just brilliant. I wish you were all here with us.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't actually. It'd be a bit noisy, but I do. But
there are a lot of logs for everyone to sit on.
But so on that, like creating the conditions. I mean, I'm probably being a little bit cynical, but I wouldn't say, in my experience, we've got generally in sort of everyday life these days, the conditions for cultivating our imaginations are are
few and far between.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, because again, listening to you, it makes my head, my head jumps to children, it jumps to people in work, but probably because those are things those are connections that I can make. But I think so start with children, for example. When it's what I see quite quickly. Just in my own little view of my own experience of being a parent and watching children grow up, is that imaginal capacity is kind of it's there from very young, and when kids are given the space and a bit of guiding to sort of cultivate that, it goes off to go. But then you see them going into kind of schooling, and it feels like it's just like imagination is some sort of slightly weird kind of like, again, it's like, well, that's not going to help you. That's not a productivity quality. Or sort of getting ahead on imagination doesn't. I don't know. I mean, I'm probably being a little bit, but so how, and that's just obviously with kids, and I think about working with businesses, and again, what I experience, what I see, what I feel is that there is a real often a real lack of confidence in using imagination. And then if you want to lay in moral imagination, at least my understanding, I guess my shorthand would be, I know there's a lot more to it, but like imagination with a sort of responsibility almost, sort of again, it's not an obvious thing for folks to go to.
No.
In those kind of contexts, because again of sort of wanting to play it safe, and keep within the, and be productive, and not wanting to maybe rock the boat. Or so what's your experience of that with this work, and how are you seeing people show up, and what have you learnt about helping people cultivate this?
Well, I think what you bring up about kids, it's really sad, but it's really hard. Like, as you say, like schools are not places where imagination is cultivated. And something really interesting from the neuroscience angle is, like, in our brain we have these different circuits, and this is what I talk to I've talked to businesses and organizations when we've done this work with imagination, which is, by the way, incredible to be able to to go into places, into organizations, and working with like policymakers, and to have, I think the world has changed a lot that is even being invited in.
Yeah.
That imagination is being recognized as something important, and
that's a good signal.
It's a good signal, exactly. And there's something for me about the moral imagination that is really entwined with like meaning and purpose. Like, it's this, I think that's a great shorthand, is imagination with responsibility. But it's, what I find is it's a space for people to connect to what is really important to them. And I think that's really subversive. And it's not, I think it's not where, it's hard to say, society wants, like, to personify society, but, the industrial complex society that is all about producing and progress, and, these like factory models of production, like, it doesn't help at all in that paradigm to have people who are exercising moral imagination.
No.
Not at all.
Pain up the arse.
Exactly.
What are you doing?
Yeah, exactly.
Just disrupting the machine.
Exactly. And it's, to me, it's like it's a form of activism. Like, oh, we just had a little
pigeon, I think.
More than human creature. Love that. Yeah.
It's a pigeon disrupting the something.
Yeah, I'm really interested in the idea of imagination activists, that there's a form of activism which is just the very powerful force of imagining that things could be different. I think that's already just so powerful, to imagine that things could be different, and that we could choose who we want to be, and like what kind of lives we want to lead. And I think, for the direction that we as a human species need to go in this next decade, and actually this next decade is crucial, It's so important what we choose to do in these next 10 years and next 20 years, like cultivating the kind of courage to do what you believe is right. And really, it's really important with the word moral. It can sound very like, moralizing and righteous and like you're wrong, I'm right, and just the idea of wrong and right as well. It's
back to the binary.
Exactly. And it's like, as a systems thinker and someone who is all about holding paradox, like there's a part of me that really doesn't kind of reacts to the word moral. And yet it's interesting. It's like, how can we shift that, in that we each find in ourselves what is our moral compass, or our sense of what is right and wrong. And I think that is really important. I don't think we should shy away from that, because actually what I think is like the kind of decisions we're going to have to make in this next 10 years, often they're going to seem totally bonkers. Like the kind of decisions that will actually change things will mean doing things like, we were talking earlier today, like leaving a really well-paid, high-status job, to go and spend a year in the jungle, or to take your kids out of school and take them into nature, or homeschooling. Like, that's bonkers from the point of view of progress, wealth accumulation, like having a career. And those kind of choices take moral courage. They take moral imagination, because it's you saying, this is what's right for me. This is what's right in my idea of the kind of world I want to live in. And it's no one else is telling you that's right or wrong. It's a choice that comes from your own sense of self and soul.
Are you on that? Are you learning as you're working with different people? Are you learning, because that's really interesting about this, this sort of personal, deeply personal sort of compass, but are you learning that actually that despite our differences and whatever, that there are these common qualities to the compass, the sort of...
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's very connected to values, and there's a lot of great work around values, although I find sometimes there's a sense of what is right that you can't necessarily put into language and into categories of like, these are my 5 top values. I think that's why the imagination labs and the workshops have centered on expanding the perception to include like future generations and the more than human world, because it's really important. There's no formula. There's not like, I'm very careful as like the role of facilitator, there's never an imposing of like, this is what's right, this is what's wrong. It's giving people the space, like just simply having a space. Like the work, we ran a 4-day imagination lab with a community in Somerset called the Watch It community last year, and then continued to work together after that. And, some of what I heard from the community members was just that, like, we've never had a space and time and space dedicated to just explore like what is really important to me and to us as a community. Like that in itself is powerful. Tell us
a bit more about that, and also just for folks, I think it must be intriguing. Like, how did that happen? Who are these people? Like, what brought them to brought them to this idea of like, we need to sort of imagine the future here or we need to sort of start to go on this journey of trying to bring this place to, this intention to this place. What was? Tell us a bit about that, if you can.
Yeah, well, the invitation came from a very, very visionary community organisation called the Onion Collective, and in particular, Jess Prendergast and Georgie Grant, who are part of the Onion Collective. They have a project called Attachment Economics, and as part of that project, Jess was writing a book with contributions from many different community leaders around the UK, all about exploring this idea of what is an economics that is reattached to time, place, community, and so they were looking for like a narrative imagination partner to help them host workshops with 30 or so community members who would go through a couple of workshops originally just to write contributions to the book. So like what is important to them, and what I love about my work with the Onion Collective is like we both work with emergence. So it was really like there was a real trust in like we don't know exactly what you're going to do. Like this is Jess and Georgie. We don't exactly get what you're going to do, but we sense that it's the right thing. And that was extraordinary for as a kind of imagination practitioner. I think having that ability to not have to promise the outcomes and the like outputs of these spaces is really, really important for the imagination to work, to actually to happen. Especially just to jump back to like work that I've done with organizations, often it's there's a lot of trust building needed to realize that like the current ways that we're doing things, if we do those again, even though we are certain of the outcomes, we're certain that we don't want those outcomes because they're not actually working. So like to realize that you can have certainty in using like tried and tested methods, like all sorts of things like, okay, we've got to plan the like next 5 years of strategy or like strategic aims, all of these ways of doing things that people
part of the illusion. Yeah.
People in organizations, like they know, like the leaders in these organizations, they know that it's like, it's just not really doing it. And so to make that leap of faith of, okay, we're going to try a different way, and it's uncertain what's going to happen, but at the same time we know that the certain stuff isn't working.
Yeah.
So like that's really important. Where were we with the, just trying to remember.
We were talking about you were talking a little bit about the story of the Watchet community and this trust in the emergent process that has kind of catalyzed this work together.
Yeah, and it's really extraordinary. Like doing this work. It's not really like you can be like an expert in imagination. I mean, you can and you can't. It's like it just seems a little bit weird to say that. I think with my scientific background, like I'm the bit that I can bring from that is to do a lot of research around like the neuroscience and psychology. And as I said, I think I was saying that the brain has these different neural networks of one neural network, which is called the default mode network, is all about like, strategic thinking, completing tasks. And it's also very connected to building like a normal sense of reality and like a stable sense of self, which is really interesting.
Are those the networks that tend to, as we age and get on, that tend to like, I mean, I can't remember, I think it was Michael Pollan with his work on psilocybin and stuff was talking about like that. I think that those networks, almost like if you imagine rivers and stuff, tend to get quite over time grooved.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So we get locked into those pathways of thinking and imagining, I'm guessing. And so
yeah, exactly. But then the other neural networks, like that network actually has to be switched off to access the network that brings about dreaming and imagining. And so, to be able to access that rich compost of creativity, you have to create spaces where you're not having to do both. You're not having to deliver an outcome or work under pressure to make something happen. And that's where like the rest and the kind of creating these zones of like almost imaginal zones where you don't have to have an outcome or a strategic aim is really important. And the other thing, especially with the Watch It project, like after the project was finished, we interviewed quite a few of the community members on what it was like and what happened. And just remembering one of the interviews with an amazing woman called Sarah, who was saying, when I got the invitation, I thought, what is this? And like, who is this? Is this some, I think her words were like, is this some yoga teacher who's going to like do some woo woo thing, which I loved. But she came along and there was that trust. But it's what's really interesting for me as the person who has this like slightly impossible task of like creating the space for imagination to happen and making sure people feel safe enough that they can show up and be there, but not so safe that they can't, like, I mean, it's not safety, but not telling them so much that actually it ruins the fertile, mysterious in-between space that actually leads to the feeling of magic.
It really had a remarkable effect, a strange effect, really. It was almost like magic. The magic in it was the complete emergence of a 5-year-old that I'd actually suppressed for 20, 30 years. This 5-year-old that was constantly thinking, I'm excited about life, I want to do something in life, I'm appreciating life. But it is a remarkable sort of thing that you're doing. You're actually letting all your inner being, all of your nurtured soul come up to the top. It's bubbling through your body. It's not just a feeling where you're imagining that, it's a physical thing. For me, it was a physical thing. It's enhanced my senses, my smell is more acute, my vision is definitely hyper. You pick out colours in nature so much more. For me, MI is just mind-blowing.
Yeah, because as you're talking, it's making me think, you know, for me, one of the things I've witnessed and experienced and come to know is that actually when we're on these kind of edges of what we know and don't know, you know, when we're on this kind of these uncertainty spaces and edges, you need some of this discomfort, not really knowing. Actually, the sort of creative capacity is sort of seems to open up, like, you know, because it's a sort of very sort of fertile sort of condition when you're, you know what I mean? It's like we're on the sort of boundaries of what we understand.
Yeah.
And obviously, again, in our sort of modern controlling cultures, we create environments where we try to remove that, really, you know, to make it sort of feel safe and solid and, you know what I mean, contain. And actually, you know, it's making me think now, you know, we're sitting in this wood, right? It's pitch black, okay? We're around a fire, can see some of the stars through. It's a cold January night. It's stunning, right? And my mind's just like racing, you know, and it's kind of like, you imagine like we invest millions in these buildings and offices and putting people in these spaces, you know, to come into every day. It's just like, why don't we just divert all that cash into rewilding the world and just get everyone out to do it and to imagine the new world we want? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's the solution. Yeah. Why just get rid of offices?
But Dan, imagine then everybody would not be doing all their work. But then you start to really question like the fundamentals. You're like, what is work? Yeah. I met with an amazing person called Lou, who's part of the Resource Justice group. It's a whole group of young people trying to shift wealth into systems change, and she had this great phrase which was "work is a scam," and it really stayed with me because, I mean, you know, there's work, meaningful work. You know, I think part of the human condition is that we all want to contribute. You know, there's a real beautiful desire to be part of the web of life and to contribute and to learn and to, you know, interact with the world. And then there's like the work that I think Lou is talking about is work as a scam. It's like the work that is just to make the salary, that is just to buy the house, you know, at these prices that are inflated. But, you know, it's like this kind of loop that is completely divorced from like a meaningful life. I really hope that, you know, especially with the conversations around UBI, although I think there are also a lot of problems with UBI as like a method that, again, there's a kind of reductionism to like, oh, you know, we'll just give everybody, that's a whole conversation. But, you know, I think I'm very excited to see what could be possible when we realise, like, again, I think it's again the like moral imagination of like, what is the point? What is a human life? Like, why are we here? What is our purpose? Like, is it progress? Like, to what?
You know, we subsidise the hell out of, you know, this extractive stuff to try and speed up our lives, you know, whether it's roads, fossil fuels, all this stuff, all to go faster. You know what I mean? Billions and billions and billions to go faster. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas, like,
But faster
why
to
aren't we
where?
just subsidising slowing down? You know, subsidising
I love that, Dan.
these local, you know, community-led systems, you know, to reimagine these systems to slow us down, to bring life back, to make, you know, to create more, to spread this kind of, you know, to create a standard of living that is modest and sustainable and accessible. Do you know what I mean? Because that's really what we're talking about. Like the all of this grind that so many of us are involved in is not to benefit ourselves. It's to support a system of extraction and shareholding and financial systems, and do you know what I mean? I mean, it's not, it's extraction of finance and soul and energy, and but I don't know, it's funny, isn't it? Because you kind of think, like, I mean, this doesn't, I'm just fascinated, like, I mean, maybe we're full circling here, but it's almost like, wouldn't it be fascinating just to be having these conversations everywhere now? Do you know what I mean? Just creating the space for people to speak to these times.
And I was so excited at the pause that was, you know, catalysed by the pandemic. Like
the great pause.
The great pause. And, you know, and it was a complex pause, because it was also, and it still is, a time of massive loss and grief and unequal loss.
Yes.
And there was this glimmer of, oh my gosh, the world has paused. Like, there is a pause of work, you know,
and
every day.
most people's work is completely irrelevant. That was the other bit.
Yeah, that was the other thing. Yeah.
Those of us that actually pause discovered that actually our work was completely irrelevant. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it was kind of like, only essential work will continue.
The folks that didn't get a chance to pause, that have been, you know, keeping everything going.
Yeah.
It is the essential work, and it's like the caring. It's like we need to pour money into caring. Yeah. And love.
Yeah. I had this
sorry, I got a bit carried away.
No, I love that. I love it, Dan. I had this like imaginal moment where I was just thinking, like, what if bankers, you know, bankers and management consultants, like, what if all the bonuses from the banking industry went to the NHS this year? Like, what if, you know, each one, or what if another one that's like really got me is like, what if you could create a way for people with a salary of above £100,000 to, like, you know, have an option to just like send a portion of their salary to teachers, of just, you know, something, just stuff like that. It's like, and I think there could be really interesting ways. I mean, I worked as a funder for 18 months, which was really, like, I was really interested in how to apply like different forms of governance. So before really focusing in on this imagination work, my obsession has been governance, and actually they connect quite a lot. It's like different forms of governance for people listening, meaning like how we make decisions and how things like money and resources get allocated, and how we do that together. And that can be, you know, how we use technology to do that differently, or how to use like different forms of voting. Like, you know, the only form of voting most of us are familiar with is the political system as it stands. But there are so many different ways of doing decision making and voting, and ways where people's real desires could be represented in the mechanisms we use to make democratic decisions and participatory forms of governance. And so, like, I think, especially with, like, you know, we talked about the dangers and the risks of tech and the digital world, but I think one of the things that it opens up, which is really exciting, is like these ways of connecting finance, like money, programmable money, being able to be sent, you know, from a banker to a teacher, and to create these platforms and these ways of rewiring value and economy. Like, I think it is really exciting.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with my dad, Dan Burgess.
Thinking about, I'm thinking about this forest. It's like, where do you, the nutrients,
Yes.
where do they go to? They go where they're needed, right?
Yeah.
And like right now, like, where we need to be putting the nutrients is all of those folks on the front lines, the essential workers, all the people that have just been like grinding to keep everything going in awful conditions, so vulnerable, that's where we need to be chucking all the nutrients now, and you imagine the excess of nutrients that sits in this culture. This kind of just
the waste,
just how much is just not needed by those that have them, you know what I mean? I mean, it's
I think people, like, as I said, like working as a funder, being really interested in philanthropy and wealth holders, and not vilifying people with wealth who aren't, sharing it, but actually, having compassion and working with those people so that they can also feel part of the web of life.
That's interesting.
Everybody wants to contribute, and so there's a real invitation rather than kind of being like, oh, you, us, and them. I think part of the work is to really work with, find, again, moral imagination, like the people's. I really believe that everybody has that fire in them of like the way they thought the world would be. And I just think it's been, for most of us, there's a death by 1,000 cuts of like, we're kids, and when we're kids, we have these ideas of what our lives are going to be like and what the world is like. And, slowly, by all the little kind of compromises or the moments of like disillusionment or, deciding that, it's not really possible to dream like that or to hope for something better, that kind of sense of who do I want to be, how do I want to contribute gets slowly kind of winnows away. So I think the imagination work for me is really about creating the spaces for people to come back alive, to reconnect with life. It's like Joanna Macy talks about coming back to life. Like, I don't think there's one human being on this earth who doesn't want to feel alive and to feel connected and to find their place in this web of life.
It's almost like a sort of infection. Do you know what I mean? Not another one.
Like a mycelium,
exactly.
more like a fungal infection.
Not involving masks,
not the bad
and stuff, and hand sanitizer and stuff like that. Not that kind of infection.
No, but like a kind of inoculation.
Yeah.
An inoculation.
Yes. Yeah. Spores.
Yeah.
Imagination spores.
Imagination spores. I love that. Yes. The imagination mushroom.
Yeah. Talking of the more than human and the mushroom, can we speak a little bit about the more than human?
Yeah, I've been very, very influenced by the time I spent working here at Schumacher College, which is all about, I was lucky to meet teachers like John from H. Shields. I will remember him, but if you type in John H. Shields, you'll find it. Well, there's Nature Connection. Bill Plotkin, his work around eco-psychology and soulcraft. Obviously, Stefan Harding, who I work very closely with, all about, reconnecting with Gaia and sit spots and finding a place in nature and sitting in that same place every day. That's like a really simple practice. You choose a spot. If you live in a city or a town, if you just have a spot, even in a park, where you go back day after day after day, and you just commit to going back. Every day is obviously really, really impressive in our busy, stressful lives, but even if it's once a week, that you start to develop the sensitivity in your perception to see the very gradual shifts in the more than human world. So, the trees, the leaves on trees slowly changing colour. This is something during the pandemic, in the first 3 to 6 months of the pandemic, when we ran the first ever kind of public Moral Imaginations lab. It ran over 6 weeks. and people would show up once a week on a Friday, and we'd create this imaginal zone where we would host these different practices, and then in between the practices people had kind of like a mission or like tasks to do to help cultivate the imagination in between the sessions. And so developing the ability to go out and to just notice what is there, to listen to the bird song. And to notice how the birdsong changes, for example, throughout the day, or if you go, back to your sit spot every time at the same time, can you hear the same bird singing each time? And just waking up to that, like the extraordinary existence of like birds. Like I know that sounds like really crazy.
We love birds on the Spaceship Earth.
I love birds. Sometimes I just get taken over by this feeling of gratitude that our world still has birds in it, given that we've created so much noise pollution and destroyed so many of their habitats. But imagine a world without birds, without that bird song, birds just singing. It's like totally free. You don't have to buy an iPod to like listen to birds sing. It's there for us to listen to. So that's one of the ways. And then obviously one of the core practices of moral imaginations is the Council of All Beings, and this is a practice that I learned a version of from Joanna Macy, and you've also many people have participated in the Council of All Beings, so sitting in circle together in person and voicing, speaking on behalf of more than human beings.
We should chat that, because it's quite like my experience of the Council of Beings, which was actually, it was here. In fact, it was here.
That's really funny. And I've hosted Councils of All Beings here, so it's really weird.
It's all here, and I remember like because we did like the first of all we had to sort of had a bit of a gathering to explain a little bit about what we're going to do, and then we got into like trying to find our being, which I think we were encouraged. I actually think we did some sit spots or something. We were sort of like encouraged on that sit spot to sort of kind of like have a little sort of start to sort of imagine like what was coming, what was the being that we wanted to become. And then there was the whole mask making experience, which is like absolutely brilliant. So you decide who you were. I think I was, what was I? I think I was a willow tree.
You often remember.
Yeah.
Like, people often remember even years later.
I was a willow tree.
This is who I was.
And you make the masks, right? Everyone makes the masks, and then you have the actual the council. And I remember we went into one of the buildings, and we did it. And obviously, there's a whole process which I've sort of forgotten, but effectively, you are voicing, you are bringing life, right, to these more than human beings, and you are speaking to these times and how you imagine, how you believe, how you feel that this being might speak to these times, right? Mm-hmm. And we're speaking to because there's a human sort of present, right? If I remember rightly, is that right?
There are many different ways of hosting the session. So in the one you were in, it sounds like there was also a human.
It was, because I remember they got a lot of grief,
a lot of stick,
rightly so. But it was it might sound whatever, but it was an extraordinary experience. That, as I say, this was probably 2010, 10, 11, 12 years ago, and I still remember. And I remember actually a friend of mine, Chris, who was in it. He was a slug, and I remember he was a slug because he had a Welsh accent. He was a slug with a Welsh slug, and. My friend Mark was a buzzard, but it was very powerful. Can you share a little bit more for folks, because I think it's how, and also particularly how, because there's always that, because I think there's what I also recognise is there's the going back to what we've spoken to about we're not, many of us are not used to use or being encouraged to use our imaginations. So there's something about the invitation to people to go on this process that I thought was interesting, because I could, that uncomfortableness of like, oh my God, I've got to be a being. Like, what am I going to be? And then what am I going to say? And but then when you let yourself go and you cross that threshold, it's powerful, right? It's
it is. And I think that's I have to say it's been many, many years of practicing and training in that work, because it is a big thing to help people feel safe and like they're not going to look like an idiot to go into that kind of space and to explore things that are very different to anything they've potentially ever tried before. Maybe they remember as children playing make-believe or role play, but for many of us it's probably been decades since we did that kind of thing. And
the mask is interesting, isn't it? Because it gives you that sort of, it allows you to sort of gives you that kind of confidence to express yourself.
And it's interesting in kind of shamanistic cultures and practices. Like, often the mask is a way of we talk about possession, but often saying someone's possessed is a very negative thing, but actually possession can be a wonderful thing. To be to have the voice of another being, human, non-human, speak through you. That's the core part of some of these very ancient, mythical, powerful traditions, and so some of that is coming through. It's a very, very it's a very powerful experience in different in all sorts of different practices and exercises, speaking on behalf of another, someone, something, or someone that is not you. I think.
But there's something, as you're speaking, it's making me think, going back to this, the scientific realm and the rational mind, because people go, oh, but how can you be a willow tree or a slug or whatever? But if we go back to this, this story of interconnection, that we are in many ways, we are, we share bacteria, always. DNA, sort of, cell, all kinds of stuff that is, there is this permeability between us and all that's not. So actually, when you start to sort of work from that place, we are, right? We just, you know what I mean?
It's like it's not make believe, it's real.
Exactly.
Here we go. We're going back to the beginning of our conversation. And
these are our relatives. This is our family here.
It is very psychedelic when you start realizing these things are just, that's just the truth. That's just science. Psychedelic, like, I think trying to remember the etymology of the word, but it's about the shift of the mind. Obviously we associate it with medicine or drugs like mushrooms and LSD, but psychedelic can also be about that quality of shifting perception.
It's back to sort of like psyche, right? And soul and and again, I guess that feels like the thing, isn't it? The psyche, the soul has, these. I use this word modernity because I do feel that it is, it's encouraged us to not connect with that, to separate ourselves from that, and yet I feel that it's the root of so much trauma for people. And it's very difficult to even realise it, because it manifests through all kinds of traumatic things. But the idea that it could be this, that we've lost this greater connection to this, our sort of psychic, our soul selves, and the more than human.
I would say it's never too late.
Never too late.
Never. I feel really strongly, think, like, I don't know when in my life I'll focus more on this, but since I was actually really young, like, the idea that everybody should have the access to go and spend time in nature has been very, very important to me. And although I guess the flip side of that's a bit difficult is like if everybody spent time in nature at the same time, I guess then, you know, there'd be fewer places where you could, you know, truly experience being alone in nature. But I believe there's enough space for
but
everyone.
there's something for me again. You know, if you look at even, but there is, you know, there is this sort of nature as destination and
True.
and nature as in, you know, because again, you know, we've designed sort of places of, you know, where we live, how we live. We've sort of designed nature out of modern cities, places, right? You know, we make it concrete and steel and whatever, and there's a few trees here or whatever. But you know, I mean, I always think, again, imagine I sort of see, I can imagine, like, if we just rewilded cities and all the places that were like desperately where the natural world's been removed, right? And also again, folks that really need this stuff, right? Imagine what that would be like. Like, how would people feel? Like, imagine walking out of a you know, a block of flats that was just, you know, immersed in you know, plants, and we know that you bring plants back, you'll bring birds back, you'll bring insects back, you'll bring life back. You know, imagine a sort of humming, thriving city. You know, like, what would you be as angry? Would you have a level of stress where you distrusted everyone? Would you want to go and buy more shit? Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
I don't know,
well, it makes me think of that famous study with the rats and the study where they had 2 rat cages. One rat cage they called kind of rat paradise. So there were loads of toys and games and plants, and they made it, you know, there was food and it was an abundant place. And then there was a cage where it was just, there was nothing. It was like completely bare of things, you know, toys and nature. And then they put these kind of water dispensers and put cocaine in the water dispenser, and the rats in the rat paradise didn't use the cocaine at all. It was there, they tried it, but they didn't do it again. And obviously in the cage the rats became highly addicted on cocaine. And it just, you know, again makes me think about like people living in conditions and in cities where they feel disconnected from who they are, and they don't have the things they need for well-being, and what that leads to. And that is, I think that's almost like at the core of what we're talking about here.
Yeah. And that's the stuff I think, again, I just, you know, that feels, again, like how we decide is valuable, I guess, as cultures. You know, like, you think about, I have no idea what it is, but like the billions that goes into sort of weaponry and defense, and do you know what I mean? And this kind of this weird idea of like, you know, what is needed to protect, you know, and to sort of be safe. Whereas like you think, wow, imagine like a fraction of that being kind of like just invested in bringing life back into cities, into places, you know, just.
I like the vision of the city. I love the vision of the city, with the just like rewilded
like,
city.
and what that, you know, but that's stuff that people can see and feel and experience quite quickly. You could notice how that was playing out. Do you know what I mean? Like, what does that do? What does that do? And it just feels like these things aren't. They feel very achievable with a shift in in perception of what is valuable. What is valuable.
No, totally. And like I for the last like couple of years, I've been really fascinated by how we ascribe value, and it's something that I've spoken with Daniel Schmachtenberger, who's a really interesting thinker and kind of modern philosopher, and the idea of, you know, how do we look at a tree. This has like bothered me actually since like when I was at university, was like thinking about economics and how, you know, when we think of a tree, the only way we have to value it is by its material.
Just cutting it down.
Yeah, it's the wood. It's the dead. It's only as a dead thing. We don't have a way of valuing and measuring its value as a living thing. So we can only value it as dead, which immediately, obviously, totally discounts its value as alive. So then the whole system is skewed towards cutting down the tree, because that's the only way it can actually bring us any form of value that our system recognizes. So again, it's perception. And so, you know, that's just one example, but there are many different, obviously, like just, you know, building a concrete building on top of soil. Like, we don't have a way to have numbers in our system, because our whole financial system is based on numbers and numerology. So what are the numbers in our system that can recognize and represent the value of soil and rich, fertile soil, which actually we find out radical things like, you know, when people put their hands in soil, they reduce their levels of depression because of like some of the kind of some of the I can't remember, like some of the stuff in the soil, like actually physiologically it has an effect.
The microbes and
and it's like we don't even know what we're destroying. And so, like, I think that's
there was that great thing, isn't it? I thought sort of again about sort of, you know, as again, and it feels like common sense when you talk about this stuff, but you know, that discovery of the gut microbiome and how in people who are eating food, plants grown in local soils without chemicals, recognizing that the microbes in the gut are identical to what is found in the soil, and actually, like, that's a sign of health. And as we've destroyed the soils through industrial ag and whatever, you know, obviously you're taking that, you know, the depleting that content of the soil, and the products that we're producing are, you know, becoming full of chemicals and whatever, and that's replicated again in the gut, and that's obviously leading to all kinds of disorders and diseases and health things. And so again, so this value of like you say, like this relationship between the human and the more than human is so profound. It's so in terms of it, in terms of the health and the well-being that's mirrored, right? Of healthy ecosystems, healthy humans. You know, it's
planetary health,
totally entangled.
I remember when I worked for a bit in regenerative agriculture when I was just come out of the lab, working in the lab and working with like algae and bacteria and soil. And something that I remember finding out was that, like, when we deplete the complexity of soil, like the microbes that make up this like diverse soil, we deplete the complexity of the sugars in the plants that we then eat. And then that actually reduces the complexity of our microbiome, you know, the bacteria. And then that leads to things like gluten intolerance and, you know, dietary struggles and mental health, because the gut is so connected with the brain. And like there's a direct, I think the vagus nerve connects the gut to the brain, and actually some of our gut bacteria secrete, like release like neurotransmitters like serotonin. So there's like direct, you know, the human mind is connected to the soil.
Wow.
I mean, what? You know, that cosmic. Kind of cosmic.
Yeah.
That kind of science is the science I want to see taught in schools, not the science that's like. But
that requires, and this is sort of, we're going full circle, which maybe is, you know, is interesting but it's making me think again. You know, there's an unknowingness to all of this, right? There's a part of this which is at least for me, to me it says that, you know, we can understand so much, but actually there's what we're also, I think, what this speaks to is that there is this complexity that is unknowable, but so you have to trust in that, and you know, some of it we can understand, but actually that having that curiosity of the complexity, and back to, you know, this stuff as, you know, we're the baby again, you know. It's like we're learning, but there's this intelligence that's built up over this, you know, these billions of years is so much that we can't know it, and so back to the composting. That's what I'm feeling a lot at the start of this year, is about how to compost certainty and knowing and sort of bringing sort of life and light and energy to sort of unknowing, and, you know, that there is awe and wonder again to this, and how to bring that back and to nurture that, because that feels really, it feels like a shift that's really important, to let go a little bit of the certainty and this desire to feel that you have to be able to figure it out and justify it, and it's there and we have to know it. And if we can't, if science and all these fantastic things that we've developed are, if we can't prove these things, then how can we possibly know it? So I'm composting certainty and knowing. Rational
Wonderful.
Knowing. Intellectual knowing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's got its uses.
It's got its uses. Don't throw the baby out of the bathwater.
I'm not going to throw it out.
Yeah,
but you know what I mean.
I remember when you were talking about science, you're like, I'm not a scientist, but actually, how can we can all be scientists? It's about, again, perceiving the world, being sensitive to the world, and maybe it's more similar to an indigenous scientist than the kind of current progress-driven, industrial funded academic intellectual scientist. Maybe it's a different kind of scientist. Yeah, I think exactly. And I think that connection, that spending time trying to connect to that all this is not human, whatever we call that, the ecological self. For me, it's like the natural self, right? It's like that deepens our understanding and our desire to, I think, that understanding of who we are, but also then our commitment to, to sort of, to wanting to bring our kind of moral imagination to life, because we're more connected to the awesomeness of it all. You know what I mean? Yeah, to the gift of being a human. Yeah, it's like, wow. Yeah, I love how Joanna Macy talks about the gift of being alive, and she just totally embodies that wonder and that sense of like, what a miracle to be alive and to be. She talks about being a self-reflexive human, like a human who can reflect on the world. And actually, just in a conversation this morning with a friend, we were talking about how grief is what cracks us open, and Joanna Macy talks about the heart that breaks. The heart that breaks open can hold the whole world. And so again, like that, the grief and the holding the world, and that in a way, this is my friend Andy who was saying, human beings are almost like the universe cracking open to notice itself, which is it's very philosophical. But there's something about this gift of being a human being and being able to reflect, and the importance of choice, having the ability to make choices about what we do and who we are. Isn't that the essence of being a human? Yeah, and I don't know, I sort of have a feeling that, if you ask this question, if you created space for people to imagine the futures they wanted, I actually think the vast majority of human beings on this planet would want a different world. Like I actually think the minority, it's a minority, and again, I'm not sort of trying to sort of who's right, who's wrong, but what I'm saying is sometimes it feels like this belief that nothing can change. My sense increasingly is, I don't know, I just think it's because we're not used to sort of thinking about, we're not used to being asked to imagine, to consider a different future. We don't know who will listen, and the worst thing is if you express like trying to imagine how things could be different, and then it's like, but no one's listening and it's never going to happen. But if we believe that it can happen and we can come together in these communities, and there are things that we can take into our own hands. Like not everything has to come from government. No. So that kind of empowerment to decide. But I mean, it's funny because I feel like, imagine like the moon's just come up. I know. I was about to say, just looked behind us because there was this bright light. It's just, what is it? It's waning, isn't it? 2 days off the full amazing moon, but it's absolutely. It was a Cancer full moon. I'm a Cancer. Right.
It's the wolf moon.
It's the wolf moon, the first full moon of 2022.
And we've now got the moon sort of rising on the other side of the wood. I was just thinking, like, imagine, like, I was just thinking to my oldest daughter, I was, sort of painfully talking about school and subject. I just imagine going to, like, moral imagination class. Oh, well, I've got double moral imagination tomorrow morning. Do you know what I mean? Imagine that. Imagine if we were, like, cultivating that in our children.
Gosh.
It's like, why aren't we doing that? It's like, why? If you know what, you would definitely want to do that for your GCSE, wouldn't you? You'd go, I'm definitely doing moral imagination.
I'm taking double.
It should just be a curriculum study. But that's, I often I come back to the young because I've.
They give me so much hope.
So much hope, but I just think, like, what they have to deal with. I often think about this, like what they are experiencing in these times, like if we let's just drill into where we live, this country. You've got a sort of political culture of lying and deceit and fear and divisiveness, and they see it. They feel it. They hear people talk. They see it. You've got this kind of weird culture of I don't know. It's just so. It's. I know there's lots of good stuff bubbling up and lots of other great stuff, but they are exposed very young now to, look at the climate issues, look at, so many things they see and feel. Look at COVID, being locked down for 2 years, not being able to snog anyone, not being able to, you know what I mean? Yeah. All these things that they're experiencing at such a young age.
Yeah.
And so for me, I'm like, well, why aren't we creating spaces for them to, they really know that we need something new and different. And you kind of think, like, the least we could be doing is allowing them to work with their dreams, and do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because instead we're forcing them down this is what you need to know, you know what I mean? This is the knowledge that's important.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's interestingly bringing up I'm
ranting.
No, I feel like we're both quite good at the ramble. The ramble and the rant.
The ranty ramble.
The ranty ramble. Yeah, it's reminding me of when I was working at Imperial College, London, after, like, it was my first role in science after I graduated, and I was part of a group that started the fossil-free divestment campaign there, like trying to, I was 22, trying to convince the financial manager of Imperial College, was like this, trying to convince this older man that what really needed to happen was that we take the university's investments out of fossil fuels, because if you're investing in the destruction of the future, then you're directly harming the students' futures. Like, it didn't make any sense. And our argument, it didn't work, but my fingers are still crossed that, we started that, must have been 2015. So, 7 years on, maybe, which Harvard just divested from fossil fuels after an 8-year campaign. So I'm still excited to see if that ever happens with Imperial College. But we had this argument of stranded assets, of, like, the when you look to the future, when you imagine the future, you can see that fossil fuels won't be part of it. So it's putting your money into fossil fuels is a stranded asset. And I think it's the same thing, like, with young people, putting, going through an education system to prepare them for a world that won't exist. It's a stranded asset.
Yeah.
Just doesn't make sense.
Because most of our sort of, major learning systems, education systems, are still preparing kids for a high carbon, competitive world.
What does your daughter say? Like, how does she find it?
I mean, I think she's, I would say, she's anxious. She struggles, I think, with, again, just like finding your curiosity, because it is such a sort of, it's a factory. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're just moving through a production line. That's really what's going on in these places, and it works for some. Some kids can do it, and they can put their heads down and do it. Many can't. Why we're still upholding these systems, because when we have so much knowledge, we know how to do extraordinary things to help cultivate beautiful, resilient human beings. Do you know what I mean? There is so much potential and possibility now to reimagine these human systems. You know what I mean? It's like I literally, my brain can't compute why. Because and I think with children, we with the future that's coming, the very least we could be doing is reimagining these systems so that children have some chance of thriving in the complexity and uncertainty. These aren't like, it's not like we're looking for big technological shifts or big innovations. It's just a reimagining of a human system so that it's grounded in a reality, you know what I mean? That is connected, that is empathic, that has responsibility, that is based around care. Do you know what I mean? It's like,
exactly. And that's why, for me, the moral imagination work is systemic. Like often, it may seem like, oh, it's very personal work. It's personal development. But for me, it's all about how we shift perception to be able to build an economic system, a democratic system, an education system that includes all of these things that are currently not being included, like a vision of the future generations and what's going to work for them, like the stranded assets and the not investing in fossil fuels, or an education system that prepares kids for the kind of world that's coming, like that kind of wisdom. It's like a designing systems with wisdom. That's what I think we need.
Bring it on. Let's bring it on, Phoebe. You're bringing it on. You're bringing it on. We're all bringing it on.
We're all bringing it on, and we will be. We hopefully will be in forests like this one as we bring it on.
I know. Look, the tawnies are out now. Maybe that's a sign. It's a sign for us to sort of.
It's very dark. It's very
We've been
dark
here for about
now.
3 days.
Fasting.
So, couple of things. What's a good way for folks to sort of go deeper into what your work, or to follow up on?
Yeah, you can visit www.moralimaginations.com. And I also have a Twitter account, which
I'll link to all of that. If you're on
Twitter, then that's the best place to go, moralimaginations.com.
Phoebe's very good on Twitter, I have to say. I find it's definitely worth following. You want to have your mind opened up.
Thank you so much for this chat, Dan.
Oh, thank you. It's been great. I've loved it. It's been very special to be in these woods. And I'm that moon now. Look at it. It's just like actually beaming through the forest.
Gosh. Yeah, it's the shadow of the trees against the moon.
I mean,
amazing.
It's gone quite still now. Absolutely gorgeous. So last thing, I like this analogy, obviously, of the, as has been well documented, the Earth as a spaceship, and particularly this idea of becoming crew on spaceship Earth in these times. And I like to finish with that question. Like, for you right now, what does that conjure up, becoming crew? Give us a little thought on that one.
I love all of the way you describe these things, Dan. I love the spaceship Earth. It's Buckminster Fuller, right?
It is. It's
we both love Bucky.
Many folks have sort of riffed on the concept of Earth as a spaceship, and I'm just another bloke remixing it because I like it. But
I love it. I love becoming crew.
And I guess it's interesting. Sorry, I will shut up in a minute. But this, because one of the things that sort of spangled my mind was I got really excited by this kind of idea. It was Marshall McLuhan who talked about sort of like, well, no, because Bucky Fuller said we're all astronauts, and then Marshall McLuhan said, oh no, we're all crew. And I was like, wow, that really spoke to me, this idea of sort of crew, because for me it was like, community, adventure, participation, being sort of in service to something a little bit mysterious. But as I sort of have dug deeper into that, what I've sort of come to see is that, the real crew on this earth right now are the more than human. They're the ones that are in service to life, that are serving, creating the conditions for life. And the modern human has become very passenger-like, quite removed. So I'm really, that's what I'm sort of like, I guess that's the sort of the thing I'm exploring with this is how do we sort of step into service more, and for that obviously it speaks to various things, but I was just curious about what that might say to you right now.
What comes up for me, becoming crew, the image that comes up for me is coming down from, almost like coming down from the pulpit, like coming down from this position of being above everything and, being kind of, transcendence and actually, funnily, it's like, our obsession with getting to the moon. It's like, just come back down to earth and reconnect with life, like get back into... The world is waiting, it's yearning for human participation, like it's waiting and it's yearning for us to reconnect, and I think that's what's coming through for me. It's like join the web of life, and be part of this crew. And I love the idea of, I think also it captures the uncertainty. There's something also about step into the adventure of your own life, step into that adventure and the uncertainty of that, and find the others.
Love it. Compost the certainty.
That's a really good one.
Jump into the uncertainty, and we'll see you on the spaceship soon. Amazing. Thank you very much, Phoebe.
Thank you.
Go well.
If you've appreciated listening to this podcast, would you consider sharing it with a friend or leaving us a rating or review via your podcast provider? It helps more people to find us, and we'd be most grateful.
So I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Phoebe. You can find links to her work in the show notes. As part of our experimental intention this year, we'd love to hear from you if this has provoked any thoughts in you when it comes to reimagining the future. If you applied that moral imagining lens that Phoebe speaks of, what would you reimagine? It could be anything: a system, a behaviour, a policy, a way of being, a relationship, something in your community. Let us know and we'll share them. Write us an email or record us an audio clip and send it to hello@thespaceship.earth. Now, in the spirit of experimentation, we're going to follow this episode with a bonus episode, a short experiential episode inviting you to further explore your moral imagination. Now, this episode is based on a story called The Impossible Train. It's created and narrated by Phoebe Tickell. It will need about 10 minutes of your time, and you'll need some paper and something to write with once you've listened to the story. But that'll all be explained when you download the bonus episode. So go and download the bonus episode. Thanks for listening. If you've appreciated this episode, please consider sharing it with someone else or consider giving us a review. Going to play out with a track. It's a new one from the legend that is Bonobo. It's a beautiful track called Sapien. It's really speaking to me right now. It's from the new album Fragments, which is massively worth investing in.
This podcast is created in service to life, for you. It takes time, funds and energy to make. If you'd like to contribute to the running costs, you can donate the price of a cuppa or a pint. Find the link on our website. This podcast wouldn't exist without the following crew: Charlie Shred, Audio Jedi; Vicky Turner, Show Notes; Seaman Home Burgess, Engine Room; Willow Burgess, Jingles.